joining us. In a minute, I'd like to know if you can hear me properly. So please type into chat, yes, I hear you. So I know that you can hear me. All right, perfect. Perfect. So I'd like to make, this is going to be a joint webinar. I'm going to sort of officially start it in a minute, but I'd sort of like to know who I am talking to here today. So if you could type into chat if this is your first GMAT, or if you've taken the exam before, sort of what sort of school you're aiming for, what sort of score you need. It would be really, really great. I have one person who cannot hear me, but everyone else can. So could the person with audio problems please check their hardware? And yeah, so please type in the chat if you've taken the GMAT before or not, and sort of what your scheduling plans are, what sort of score you need, that sort of thing. And we're going to start this in a minute or two. Again, I'm giving time for latecomers to also join in. All right, so far it's mostly first-timers here with us here today, and mostly 700 and up scores. Aiming at a 770, keep those standards high. Okay, I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. So again, welcome to everyone who's here with us today. The next hour is going to be the first step on your GMAT bootcamp, the 7-day journey where you're gonna learn all of the skills that you need to ace the GMAT. We can't, of course, teach everything in 7 days, but you're going to get a significant head start. Today's 1-hour session is going to be divided more or less half and half between myself and Shimri from ARINGO. In the first half, I'm going to talk about how to get that 700 on the GMAT. And in the second half, Shimri is going to talk about how to get into your top choice MBA program. And before we get started, I'd just like to say again, for those of you here with us in the GMAT bootcamp, that there is 20% off on any GMAT course, and you can just use this coupon code. This slide is going to be up at the end again, and that's all we're going to do in terms of promotions. So my name is David. I've been a senior tutor in the test prep industry for a few years now, and at examPAL specifically. And what I'd like to do, especially as there are so many first-timers here with us, is I'd like to start by explaining to you what the GMAT is, and how we at examPAL approach it, how we recommend that you approach it. And this is based upon our years of experience as test prep teachers and preparers in standard classroom formats. And basically, this is the picture that sort of highlights the standard classroom teaching experience for GMAT and for other test prep, for other standardized tests. And it's super, super frustrating. It's like banging your head up against the wall. And there's a few reasons for this. So reason number one is that there are many, many different ways to solve every specific question. And we're going to see specific examples of this later on. But at the end of the day, it's not enough for you to learn just the official way, for example, the way that's in the official guide to the GMAT to solve every question. You need to find the way that works best for you. And this is really, really hard to do in a standard classroom where it's one person versus 40. The second problem with a sort of standard classroom or textbook approach is that the biggest problem in the GMAT isn't actually learning the material. The biggest problem with GMAT, and this is especially important for the first timers among you, your biggest enemy is time. You have approximately 2 minutes per question. Now, if you had 5 minutes, if you had 10 minutes per question, if you're sort of sitting at home and solving things in a relaxed way, then you will 100% be able to solve every single one of the questions on the GMAT. But unfortunately, you don't. You only have 2 minutes. And so what you need to do throughout your prep, that's at the beginning when you're just learning the material, but especially later on, is you need to figure out how you can solve the questions quickly. So not only how to solve them, but how to solve them quickly. And two of these bind together into maybe the biggest problem in sort of the standard test prep, textbook or classroom experiences, is that it's just not really efficient. It's really, really time consuming. You're wasting time either on just practicing. And this is sometimes true even for people who do self-study. Just solve thousands and thousands and thousands of questions. And that's really not the right way to go about this. And we're going to talk a little bit today about what the right way to go about studying for the GMAT is. But anyways, all of these combined together sort of form the core of what we felt through our experience needed to be solved in order to help our students better prepare for the GMAT. And this is why we founded examPAL. This is what goes behind examPAL. And what we do is we study the way you think. So as you use our platform, and again, this is something that you should do in general for the GMAT, not just with us, but however you choose to study, this is something that you definitely have to do. And the first thing you need to do, the first thing that we do is that we study the way you think. So what are your preferred methods for solving problems? And what we also do, and this is something that's harder for you to do on your own, is to study the effectiveness of all possible methods, and then to study the fastest way to solve each question. And this is what we present to you, and this is basically the algorithm that I'm going to talk about in a moment. So the part of examPAL, and again, this isn't just about how we work, this is also about how you should work. So you should really, really focus in on what we like to call cognitive flexibility. And what is cognitive flexibility? Again, it's not just about knowing the material. It's also the ability to deal with different types of questions and to use different tools. So you can think of cognitive flexibility as your toolbox. So when you walk into the GMAT, you sit in front of that computer screen on test day, you're going to be carrying with you, hopefully, this huge box of different tools that you've learned. And this is going to be equation manipulation. This is going to be various, let's call them hacky methods like eliminating answers. This is going to be number properties. It's going to be geometry. It's going to be vocabulary. It's going to be critical reasoning. It's going to be reading comprehension. All of the things that you've worked towards, all of these are going to be tools in your toolbox. And what we call cognitive flexibility is your ability to choose which tool to use at a given question, and also to apply the tool to the question. So which tools work best for you and which tools work best for a specific question. So that's good. That has been a little bit of the theory, sort of the background of what you need to do to prepare for the GMAT. What I'd like to do is to sort of apply this to show you how this actually works. And of course, before we actually go into the practice phase, into the algorithm, we need to learn the material. And so with us, we do it in interactive lessons. So these are PowerPoint slides, which are designed to be interactive. They're videos, actually. And so they stop along the way to ask you questions and to keep you engaged. And there's teasers in there, sort of like the game show that we're going to have at the end of this GMAT bootcamp. Where we really, really, really try to bring the interactivity home. And honestly, this is really important. Some people think that, the best way to teach is to just sort of shove a book into your brain. And in my experience as a teacher, that's really not the right way to do it. Like if my students aren't engaged, they're not learning, and it's just not working properly. Okay, so enough theory. So what we're going to do now is look at our first question for the day. And the question should be on the board in front of you. And what I'd like for you to do is to take a minute or two to solve this question. And I'd like you to type the answer into chat. And what I'd like you to do is not only solve the question, I'd also like you to type into chat how you solve it. And sort of we're going to test out this cognitive flexibility and different tools, things live, because what almost always happens with this question is that different people have very different ways for solving it. And sort of let's see what happens. So please type in the answer to the question, but also please type in how you solved the question. Sort of what was your method for solving this question? So I'm seeing a couple of answer choices, but again, I'm not going to say if that's the right answer or not. I am going to request that you also type in how you think this question should be solved. What was the tool that you used to solve this question? All right, so we're seeing a few people trying numbers, picking numbers. That's definitely one legitimate way to solve this question. Some people divided the numerator by the denominator. They did some sort of algebraic manipulation. I see today most of the people are going straight for the numbers. Straight for the numbers. All right. Let's let the last person finish typing in their response, and then we'll sort of go over the different types of solutions for this message. So this is an estimation. This is very, very close to the logical solution I'm going to show. Okay, so one of the ways to solve this question actually doesn't involve any sort of calculation at all. And it's based around the logic of weighted average. And it goes like this. So if the expression had only y, so if x was really, really, really small, then the expression would be 2y over y, which would be 2. And this is the very smallest it can be. And if y was really, really close to 0, so the expression was only x, then it would be 3x over x, which would mean that it would equal 3. And so the answer has to be between the two of those. The answer has to be between 2 and 3, which is answer D, as you've said. And notice that the solution written on the board in front of you is all in words, and there's a reason for that. It's because I didn't actually calculate anything, or I barely calculated anything. I sort of went to one extreme and I looked at what happens. I went to the other extreme and looked at what happens, and I got to my answer. A second solution, which is a little bit like dividing the numerator by the denominator mentioned in chat, is a very, very what we call precise type of solution. And this is basically based on equation manipulation. So in the specific way that is shown on the board, you can if you take x off from the expression, then you get 2x plus 2y, which is exactly 2. If you add y to the expression, then you get 3x plus 3y, which is 3, and therefore the expression is between the two of those. And again, this is for those of you who like to work with equations, and I guess not many of those in the audience today. This is the way to go. This is the way that works fastest for them. And the third solution, which is the most popular today, is just pick easy numbers. So for example, if we pick x equals y equals 1, then what we get is 2.5. And here there's like an underlying assumption sort of in your mind as a test taker. And the underlying assumption is that one of the answers has to be correct. And so in this case, because only one of the options fits the number 2.5, then that has to be correct. But if, for example, both D and E had 2.5 in their range, then choosing x equals y equals 1 would have eliminated 3 of the answers and left 2 others, meaning you would have had to check another number. So these are 3 very, very different methods for solving this question. And these sort of are maybe the archetypes of the PAL approach that we teach at examPAL. And in general, these showcase very, very different thinking methods. So let me sort of try and go in a little bit into detail about what these methods are. And as mentioned, this is sort of the core of the PAL algorithm that we use. So the P in the PAL algorithm is for precise methodologies. And these are what we call arriving at exact answers using high school methodologies. And so this is usually translating your question into equations. So you take a word problem, you translate it into equations, you run through all of the math, and you get to an answer at the end. Another way is in geometry. So for example, you write down the various opposite angles or external angles or rules of regular polygons or whatever it is, right angle triangles, and you solve it and you get to the right answer. Right? This is true also for verbal. So in verbal, for example, in sentence correction, this could be using specific grammatical rules, looking at whether the pronoun is referring to the right word or not, looking at like versus as, various idioms, all these sort of very, very exact rules that you're taught in pretty much every textbook that teaches you to the GMAT, and just going through all of them until you get to the right answer to the question. The second type of method, in general, the second type of strategy with which to approach questions is what we call alternative, and this is the A in the PAL algorithm. And this is basically what most of you did in the final question. So this is using get you the right answer, even if this answer is correct. So you substituted, or I substituted in the previous example, x equals y equals 1, and maybe you chose different numbers, and you eliminated all of the answers except for D. And so you don't actually know why D is the right answer. You just know that you've eliminated everything else, and therefore the only thing that is left must be correct. This is the alternative approach, and there's also a rather large number of tools that go under the strategy. The third type of a meta tool is what we call logical, and this is sort of the first approach that I showed. And this uses basic properties or underlying logic, underlying symmetries, expanding and reducing ratios, things like, I don't know, similar triangles, things like even and odd, things like divisibility, these sorts of things. In verbal, this can be talking about, in sentence correction, again, about the meaning of the sentence, not maybe a specific grammatical rule, but how some changing one small word changed the entire meaning of the sentence and therefore it's incorrect. And similar things also for reading comprehension and critical reasoning. But at any rate, this is an approach which does exactly solve the question. So if you go the logical route, you know why the correct answer is correct, but you didn't bother going through all of the math along the way. And we're going to see a few examples of where that really, really comes into play. And again, so sort of zooming back out, this is like your first step in the GMAT bootcamp on your way to your 700 score. And what I'm sort of focusing you on is what sort of methods work best for you. So when you solve questions and when you look at the different types of answers, in an example, we show all the different types of answers that we think are relevant. Then you not only need to figure out how to solve the question, but you need to figure out if one of the other ways of solving the question, not your naive default way, but if one of the other methods maybe could have gotten you to that answer faster. And this relates back to the second observation I made at the start of this webinar, which is that your biggest problem in the GMAT isn't actually solving it. Your biggest problem is time. And this is what you should be optimizing for once you already know the material. Okay, so let's look at two more examples. And these examples I'm just going to go through, and I'm going to show several different ways to solve each. And sort of this is going to give another taste of the different types of tools available. So this is the first question. Of the 900 guests that attended a wedding, 36% were women. If 450 men left the wedding, the women would be what percentage of the remaining guests? So the naive approach to this question, which most people do certainly the first time around, is just to go and straight up calculate it. And this is the precise approach. And this is what we're going to start out with. So, okay, so if 36% of 900, that would mean that I have to calculate 36 over 100 times 900. Sort of I cancel out the 100, 36 times 9. Hopefully I'm good at doing 36 times 9. One shortcut to do it is to change 9 to 10 minus 1. Then you can sort of get to 360 minus 36. You do the math, 324 women in the wedding. Okay, so that's the number of women I had at the start. Then 450 men left the wedding, and basically I'm just going along the question, right? This is a very short word problem, just sort of going along it. So I read the first sentence, which said 900 guests, 36% were women. Okay, so I calculated how many women there are. Then I said, okay, 450 men left. So then there are 450 guests remaining. And so now I have to calculate what is 324 divided by 450. Okay, and so I might stare at this a bit and get a bit frustrated because this is an annoying number to calculate. Some people might take a shortcut and try to estimate, but we're just going to sort of go and brute force it. And in this case, both the numbers are divisible by 3. And you can see that because 3 plus 2 plus 4 is 9, and 4 plus 5 is also 9. That means that both numbers are divisible by 3. You can look at what the specific number is. You get to 3 times 108 over 3 times 150. Cancel out the 3's. Cancel out another 3. You get to 36 over 50, 72 over 100, 72%. Answer choice D. Whew. Okay. And this is the point where it's important to pause and to say that every single one of the GMAT questions can be solved in a manner similar to this. Okay, so none of the GMAT questions are research questions, as it were. This isn't an open question that nobody knows the answer for and you're the first person in the world looking at it. This is a question that has an answer, and that answer is right there in front of you in one of the options A to E. So if you just plug it into the equations correctly and go along the math, then you will get to the answer. You are guaranteed to get to the answer. The question is, can you do it quick enough? And the other way to do it is what I see people are starting to type into chat, is a logical approach. And again, the logical approach is sort of not to straight away plug and chug, put it into the equation. This is sort of step back a bit and to say, what are we actually being asked in the question? We're actually being asked about the percentage, which is the part out of the whole. So that's the woman out of all of the guests. And so, okay, we have however many women, however many guests, which is 36%. And then we know that 450 of the men left the wedding. So half of the guests left the wedding. So you have half of the guests remaining, and you have the exact same number of women because none of the women left. And so what this means is that you have twice the percentage, right? Because you started off with the exact same number of women, but you're dividing it by half of the guests. So it's going to be twice the percentage. And see how much faster that is? And again, there isn't a right way and a wrong way to solve this question. It really depends on how good you are at just doing all of the math we saw earlier. Possibly you're really good at that and you're really good at estimating it, and so go for it. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But possibly it's preferable for you to sort of zoom out for a second to look at what the question is actually asking you, and to see if there is maybe a different way to get to that answer. And that is what this solution shows. Specifically, if we look at our website, then there's a significant difference in time between people. This is one of the questions on our website. So if we look at people, at our students who've solved this, and we collect the statistics, and this is how we also recommend to you as a student which solution to use, which solution is better for you, which is fastest, and so on and so forth, then there is a significant difference in time between the two questions. Okay, so we're now going to go on to our second question for today. And this is only a half-hour intro. Sometimes it's a 1-hour webinar. So today it's a little bit shorter than it usually is. And the second question for today is a verbal question. And verbal is very different from quant, as all of you know. In terms of the algorithm, I suppose I won't go in too deeply into the differences today, but in this specific question, in critical reasoning type questions, for those not familiar, I'll just introduce the question type. Critical reasoning gives you a logical passage. So this is a string of sentences that make some sort of logical claim, after which it asks you to strengthen the claim or to weaken the claim, what is an assumption that the claim depends upon, all these sorts of things, and then it gives you 5 options, and you need to work through them. And this, by the way, is an official question from the GMAT that we have been allowed to use. So at any rate, the precise approach to this question, which I'm going to showcase first of all, is to first solve the question, is to first read the passage, to understand the passage, not to look at the answers, to look at the question, to try to infer what the correct answer to the question is without looking at the answers. And so let's go over that for a second. So I sort of explain, or rather show what that actually means. So reading through this question, the first part says that the interview is an essential part of a successful problem hiring program because, okay, so that's your sort of logical connector right there. So interviews are essential because, and then we continue. With it, job applicants who have personalities that are unsuited to the requirements of the job will be eliminated from consideration. Okay, so we can summarize this specific logical passage in a very short bullet point. And this is sort of a technique that I recommend that all of you develop. And this is very similar to note-taking on reading comprehension. So it's the ability to take a critical reasoning passage and to break it into its logical fundamentals. For those asking, yes, you will be able to replay this video later. If I'm going a bit too quickly, I apologize. But you will certainly be able to replay it later. And so at any rate, so what we did here is we broke down the logic of the passage into essentially 2 parts. So there's the first part, which says interviews are essential. And then there's this logical linker in the middle, which says because. And then it says it can eliminate unsuitable applicants. And so the question, and this is our logical breakdown of the passage. And now what we're asked to do is we're asked to look at the question, and we're asked what is an assumption that this logic depends on. And so a naive assumption, which should hopefully be clear to you, and if it's not clear to you now, it'll certainly become clear as you practice more and more CR questions, it's that the interviews actually need to be able to get the job done. They need to be able to eliminate unsuitable applications. Otherwise, this entire logical claim doesn't make any sense at all. And so what we would then do in the precise approach is we would look over our answers, and as people in chat have said, you would see that C directly addresses that issue. C specifically says that interviewers can accurately identify applicants whose personalities are unsuitable to the requirements of the job. And this is sort of, let's call it, we call it the precise approach. And it's basically following the rules of logical reasoning. So you first read the passage, you break it down into its logical components. After that, you look at your question, you ask yourself what sort of logical maybe strengthen or weaken or assumption is implied by the logic of the passage. And then when you sort of have something in mind, maybe not the exact specific answer, but definitely the direction to go towards, only then do you look at the answers and see which of the answer best fits. And the reason this is so, oh, my voice is breaking. 1 second, please. 1 second, please. Is my voice breaking for everyone, or is it just for a few people? So I hear some clears and, okay, it's okay. So I'm guessing it's just the internet on your end. The webinar will be available later. So I apologize to those of you to whom my voice is breaking up, but I'm going to continue. Okay, so why is this so important for critical reasoning questions? And the reason is that people usually waste a ton of time in the verbal section, and they do it because they read every single one of the answers and they think about every single one of the answers. And the analogy that we like to use is that this is like 5 really top of the line salesmen who are the best at their job in the world, and each one of them is trying to convince you that they are selling the correct answer. And you're sort of looking at them and you're saying, well, I don't know, is A right? And you start arguing with yourself. This sometimes happens. It's a little bit amusing to see, honestly, sometimes. When they start convincing themselves, they sort of fall in love with a specific answer and then they convince themselves that that answer is actually correct. And so that's a big no-no. So if you find in critical reasoning that you are trying to convince yourself of a specific answer, then that's a very good indicator that you're looking at the wrong option. Okay, so that was the precise approach to this question, but sometimes it's not so easy. Okay, sometimes it's not so easy to infer a specific solution to the given question, and you have no choice but to look at the answers, and this is the alternative. And again, it's alternative because what we're doing is we're eliminating the answers that can't possibly be correct. And sometimes we can understand why the last answer is right, sometimes we can't, but if we've definitely eliminated 4 of the answers, then the 5th one has to be correct, no matter if we get it or not. So in this case, let's just go over the answers one by one. So the first option talks about how a hiring program will be successful if it includes interviews. It doesn't say anything at all about personalities who are unsuited, which makes it very suspicious because that's at the core of the logical claim being asked. So it's really probably not going to be A. Looking at B, then B all of a sudden talks about job description, and this is sort of should be like a question mark raiser, an eyebrow raiser. So where does this strange new job description come from? The questions sometimes introduce new things, but very often they talk only about the things in the critical reasoning passage. And so this is sort of like something new out of the blue. It's not going to be right either. C, we know is the right answer. We'll read it and we'll hopefully see, well, okay, I found no reason to eliminate C, so we'll move on to D. And then in D, we start to get into nuances of GMAT answers, and sometimes the GMAT incorrect answers, and there are different types of GMAT incorrect answers, which I suppose we're not going to get into right now, but one of the types of wrong answers, and it's an extreme one, and so this D says the only purpose of an interview is to evaluate whether job applicants' personalities are suited to the job, and that's way too strong. So if you see a critical reasoning answer that says must or never or only or any one of these really absolute type words, there's a good chance that the GMAT's pulling your leg, and that's not the wrong choice. And then looking at E, you find a similar case. So it says the most important factor towards the end, which should be a red flag. And you also have another small red flag in here, which it says that it was once the most important factor in making hiring decisions. And so then you're then you sort of need to go back to the passage and you need to say, what do you mean it was once the most important factor? So like, and now it's not, and you sort of start wondering if this is relevant to a logic of a statement applicable today or not. It's also a weak choice. And I've specifically chosen, very specific parts of each of these answer choices to explain why they're wrong. There are other parts as well. But at any rate, we found very good reasons to eliminate A, B, D, and E. We haven't found any good reason to eliminate C. So even if we're not 100% sure how the logic sort of works, and this can happen, especially in the harder questions, then we'll just mark C and we'll, move on with our life. And again, this gets back to time. So it's much better. Well, it depends, I suppose. We have a time management video on YouTube on our channel that you can go and watch. But in general, once you get to the answer that you're 90% sure of, that's a thing that you can explicitly check. It's usually not a good idea to second guess yourself. So for example, in sentence correction, if you get down to those last 2 choices, you have absolutely no idea what the grammatical rule that separates them is, or you see the difference, but you just don't know the rule, then don't bother wasting too much time. Just take your best guess and move on. And that is how you should address questions. Okay, so that has been the majority of this webinar, and we only have a few minutes left to go before we switch over to the other part dedicated to the practice, to really learning the different types of tools that you're going to have in your cognitive flexibility tool need to acquire in order to break that 700 on the GMAT. But learning the tools isn't enough. What you also need to do is you need to improve along the way, right? You need to learn which tools are best for you. And the way we do that on our website is we make sure that you get feedback. And so we ask you for your feedback. After every single question, we ask you what is the main solution tool that you use for that question if you got it right. We ask you what is the main reason for your mistake if you got it wrong. And this is sort of a breather for you. This is sort of a mental breather after you try to answer the question, to debug yourself, to ask yourself, did I maybe make a simplification error? Or did I forget to notice a specific rule formula? Maybe I should have picked a number instead of trying to go through the math. And this is a really, really, really important part of your process. Again, this is something that we feel is so important that we've built into the system. But I also feel it's important enough to just recommend it to you as a general strategy that you need to use. Okay, cool. So this is the improvement phase. And of course, mistakes are opportunities to learn. I'm running down out of time a little bit, so I'll go a little bit quickly over these bits. In general, we divide mistakes into 3 categories. There's professional mistakes, which are mistakes that basically in the fundamental knowledge of the material. So you just did not know a specific number property, did not know a specific grammar rule, did not know the word or vocabulary. We call these professional mistakes. Technical mistakes are also called silly mistakes. You dropped a plus, you dropped a minus, you answered the wrong question, you missed something in the question stem. All these really annoying mistakes that have to do with focus. And strategic mistakes are often about question approach. So did you choose the right approach to try solving a question? Should you maybe have given up on the question like 40 seconds before you actually did and guessed and moved on? So every single one of these types of mistakes has a different type of solution approach. And this is something that you should be mindful of. And then, once you find that, you need to try and fix it. And the last phase is the optimization phase. And this really gets back into the review and everything we've talked about before. It talks about learning which types of traps there are, what the question's characteristics are. It talks about really understanding deeply your own specific strengths and weaknesses, and so on and so forth. This is sort of the final stage of the GMAT test prep. Okay, so that's more or less the strategy for approaching the GMAT in general. So I've tried to explain how the GMAT works, more or less. I've tried to explain how we think you should approach the GMAT and why we've built our system in order to do that. This is a bit of the statistics behind the algorithm. There's also a bunch of awards that we've won. So it's not only we that think the work is cool, we've also been externally acknowledged. And there are, of course, customer ratings. You can check them out for yourself. Don't take my word for it. And last but not least, we offer a success guarantee. So there are many first-timers here. This is less relevant to you, but for those of you who are retaking the GMAT, then we guarantee a 70-point increase under certain conditions, and you're welcome to check out the FAQ on those exact conditions. And so that's it for this part of the talk about, again, what the GMAT is and how to get to that 700 point. I'm now going to switch over to Shimri, who's going to take it away and talk to you about how to get into the top 10 MBA programs. And at the end of this webinar, we're going to have a Q&A session where you're free to ask both me and Shimri whatever questions you like. So stay tuned, and if you have any questions, please write them down and ask them later. So I'll be signing out for the next half hour.
Thanks, Dave. That was fascinating. Thank God I don't need to do a GMAT again. Sorry, guys, quite a nightmare, actually. I hope we can talk about the fun part of getting into an MBA, which is the application to the schools. Actually, it's not that fun. It's also hard work. So let's kick into it. Are any of you, just in the chat so I can actually know that you're hearing me, are any of you planning to apply to business schools this year? That means to study at September 2019. Wow, I'm surprised. Yes, 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 yes. Okay, I've got 1 2020, 2 2020 as everybody else, hopefully this year. Okay, so I actually did prepare a few slides that discuss the timeline as well. And I'm going to try and keep this, as we don't have long, I'm actually going to try and rush through the slides and leave time for questions. And then what I'll do is I'll try and answer during this chat or during the webinar some questions, both to address everyone if it's a general question, and I'll stay on the chat and I'll also chat with you guys if you have any specific questions. So I will see them and then I can answer you, hopefully, the system works. So great, hi. Let's just kick into a couple of slides so we're all on the same page. My name is Shimri Winters. I'm a London Business School graduate. I was also on the interviewing committee. I think I interviewed candidates for 7 or 8 years for the school. I've been at ARINGO 5 years full time. I head the strategy team here. ARINGO well, what we do is MBA Admission Consulting. We help candidates get into MBA programs, top 10 programs. We're great. Check us out. That was my marketing part. I'm just going to try and go through everything, basically. Again, if we only have 20 or 30 minutes, I'm just going to do it kind of high level. Start thinking of questions you want to ask me. You can also ask me during the presentation. Unfortunately, I do have here a million slides, but I can't go into too much detail in this short time, but I'll just try and cover the basics. Why do a top 10 MBA? This is very important also for your application and also for yourselves. Think, why do you even want to go and do a top 10 MBA or any MBA? Most of the candidates we speak to are career switchers. We have lots of lawyers, lots of accountants. I'll tell you a little secret, they're really bored at work and they would like to do something else. They go and do an MBA and then they want to move to consulting, investment banking, general management, other things. So that would be this nice purple line that you see, to do a career switch. We do see 2 other, let's call them types of candidates. I have to admit the career switchers are the most common type of candidate. First one is accelerators. If you are in a certain job and you actually like it and you want to make it to the next level, that's fine. And if you want to get some kind of edge on your peers, global top 10 MBA might be the solution. I actually gave a presentation at one of the EY offices, Ernst & Young offices, I think last week, and a guy got up and he said he went to do an MBA at Emory, and then he got another job for 1 year, and then he came back to EY and he did a jump that would have taken him 7 years, and he did that in 3 years. So that's kind of an accelerator that you want to go do an MBA, either come back directly or a year or 2 later to the same work or the same industry, just at the more senior level. Another type of candidates that we see are future entrepreneurs. Now, if you guys have an amazing idea, go for it. Like, don't do an MBA, just go for the idea. I think that's my personal advice. But if you just know you want to be future entrepreneurs, but not exactly sure how to do it, what to do, when, money, teams, etc., then the MBA program will give you lots and lots of tools. Someone's asking, what about marketeers? Not sure about that. I don't know if it's a switch or accelerator. So future entrepreneurs, that's a very common route as well, because in the MBA you'll learn finance, economics, entrepreneurship, strategy, you'll have a good network, you'll have a good brand, etc., etc. I just left here academia because I actually don't think a top 10 MBA is the right way to go then and be a professor in a university. Remember, this is a degree without a thesis, and it's hard from an MBA to then go and do a PhD. If this is your dream to go and be a professor in academia or something like that, just look for a PhD program somewhere. That's usually a better route. But again, I'm just going to rush through some of these slides. Why do a top 10 MBA? Well, there's lots of good reasons. First of all, there's great salaries after the MBA program. We'll discuss this, and I'm actually going to show you some of the salaries and average salaries. It's a great career switching opportunity. So I work with a lot of lawyers. With all due respect, no one at Amazon or no one at McKinsey, so at a tech company or at a consulting company, are just waiting for them. But the MBA is definitely a very good way to do a career switch to different industries and to different roles. Another thing, it's just great. It's great fun, and I don't want to tell you about my experience too much because I might start crying, but it was the best 2 years of my life. And it opened for me a lot of doors, both professionally, personally. I learned about myself a lot. So it was also financially worthwhile. So it just, yeah, lots of good reasons to do an MBA in case you were here by mistake on this webinar. Just to make sure that we're discussing the right program, so what are the top MBAs? Well, I think MBA programs, I think in the US, probably most of you know these programs. I actually added a new concept. Does my mother know these programs? Okay, well, I actually think my mother knows most of these schools: Harvard, Stanford, Columbia, Northwestern, Berkeley. So most of the people know these brands. I'll actually go explain that a bit further in my next slide, in 2 slides. In Europe, actually, my mother might, sorry for that concept, she's a great woman, my mother, but I'm just using her for this concept. She might not know some of these brands, and we'll go into that reason in 2 slides. But I just wanted to point out some of the top European universities like London Business School, INSEAD, IES Barcelona, HEC Paris, Oxford, Cambridge, and a few others. There are also some special programs. Definitely no time to go into them here. Just someone asked me on the chat, what about a MIM program? MIM is Master in Management Program. Some of the schools, this is actually a hot topic for the schools, are adding programs. One of the types of programs is a Master in Management Program. Just for this discussion, let's say it's exactly like an MBA, but for people with under 2 years of experience. And an MBA, you should be usually minimum of 3-4 years of professional post-graduation experience. Okay, there's a lot of cases. So if you only have 2.5 years, can you apply? Probably yes. But I'm saying generally speaking, the MBA programs will look for a 3 to 4 year minimum professional experience. Master in Management, up to 2 years. There's a lot of deferred programs. This is also a very hot topic for universities. So I put here Harvard 2+2 and Yale Silver Scholar. So these are deferred programs for younger candidates. Again, I don't think this is the majority of this crowd, so I'm not going to speak about that longer. But there are a lot of deferred programs, especially in the US right now. I think there's 7 or 8 already. And there are some special programs, either dual degree programs like the M program down here, which is a Kellogg dual degree, or MIT LGO, another dual degree program, or Cornell Tech, which is a 1-year program for people with a technology background. So there's a few special programs, and again, you can contact me afterwards or do some research and find some special programs if that's what you're looking for. I did want to add the slide because I mentioned my mom. Does she know the program or not? So I wanted to explain why. Why do people have this general feeling that the US programs are more famous or better in some cases? So the big US universities are famous in everything. Harvard have a great law school, have a great journalism school. I'm not sure about their art school, but if they have one, it's one of the best. So they're good in geography and good in everything. Same with Columbia, same with Stanford, same with Northwestern. The European schools are different. Most of the MBA programs in Europe belong to business schools that only do business. So if I look at my university, London Business School, they only have an MBA, and they have a very small Masters in Finance and Master in Management programs, but that's not the core. The core is the MBA. There's no geography, no journalism, no law, etc., etc. Same goes with INSEAD, same goes with a lot of the European programs, which is why a lot of people don't think that the European programs have a strong brand just because they didn't necessarily know that brand. Rest assured that the employers know the top brands in Europe as well. And if you just look at the Financial Times ranking or any other ranking, you will see that the European programs are ranked very, very strong as well. And we'll look soon at the salaries, and you'll see that they're actually very similar to the US salaries as well. Another differentiator is the European programs tend to be 1 year. The 3 programs who are 1.5 to 2 years, but most of the programs are 1 year versus most of the majority of the US schools, which are 2-year MBA programs. So if someone's really concerned about the return of investment, there's a big advantage to the European programs because they're shorter. Another differentiator is the students that will be with you in the class. In the US, 60 to 70% of the class are US citizens, are Americans. In Europe, it's very different. At INSEAD, there won't be a lot of French people. At London Business School, there won't be a lot of British people. They tend to be around 90% foreigners in each class. Someone's asking me, I have 2.5 years of experience. Should I go for the MIM or the MBA? Probably for the MBA program. Again, the Master in Management is for very junior people. I don't know, a 23-year-old who finished university last year and did 1 or 2 internships. That's kind of a classic master in management profile. I'm getting another question. Are there deferred programs in Europe? I don't know of any deferred programs in Europe. Again, if you Google ARINGO deferred programs, you will see a list of the deferred programs that I know about. There's 7 or 8 of them. I'm not mentioning here Canadian and Asian schools. Ranking-wise, the schools are a bit lower in ranking than the European and American schools. And I also talk about deadlines, etc. They're a bit different. If you are interested in Canadian schools, again, you can research on our site or yourself or ask me, and I'll address that somewhere else. Same goes with Asian schools. There aren't many schools which are ranked kind of top 10 in Asia, and that's why I'm not going to go through the schools. There are 5 or 6 great schools, both in Singapore, Hong Kong, China, and Australia. You'll do that kind of a little research yourself. How do I choose it? Again, I'm running through, so we have the slides, and we have a few minutes for questions as well. How do I know which school to choose? Well, I think I've been in the last 3 slides trying to convince you location, location, location. Okay, there's a huge difference between a 1-year program to a 2-year program, which might indicate Europe or the US. There's a huge difference between living in Europe throughout your MBA and probably finding a job in Europe after your MBA, and going to the US, living in the US throughout your MBA, and finding a job in the US throughout the MBA. So I think that's the differentiator. So again, location, location, location. Another factor is, yeah, let's look at the ranking of the school. Let's look at the recruiters of the school. So if I'm interested in being recruited to a very specific company, to Uber or to Lyft, I can check on LinkedIn and I can see who the recruit, where did the Uber employees come from? Or I can go on the Columbia Business School website and see which employers came to recruit the year before. I can tell you that this is my next slide, which this is a new slide I'm introducing. There's a lot of stigmas out there, and try and come to this with kind of a fresh pair of eyes, because when I speak to people, and I speak to at least 1,000 people a year, at least, and about 50% of them say, "Oh, I have two dreams, Harvard and Stanford." And then I say, "Okay, that's great. Why do you want Harvard?" And say, "Oh, Harvard, of course, it's the highest salaries." Well, actually, there was a little research a couple of weeks ago that proved that MIT salaries are higher than Harvard salaries. So that's one stigma that we can put down the drain. Another one is, I really want to go to MIT because I heard you can get to consulting from there. Well, actually, McKinsey were the biggest recruiter at 8 out of the 10 top 10 MBA schools in the US. So if you're looking for consulting, which is the biggest industry after MBAs, and specifically McKinsey, which is the biggest employer after MBAs, it doesn't really matter if you go to Duke or Cornell. You will probably get to the same company at the same salary. So what will the big difference be? Well, where will you live throughout the degree, and maybe what you'll get from Duke or from Kellogg or from MIT, but not necessarily the employer. So again, it's very important to come kind of with a fresh prize and understand really what you're looking for. What are you looking to get out of the MBA? Is it the end goal? Is it the employer at the end? Is it the high salary? Is it to make a relocation to a new country? So try and understand what you're looking for, and that will help you choose the MBA. Tuition, right? Well, this degree is very, very expensive. And if we look at the US and we add living expenses, it can get up to $200,000 for 2 years. There are some scholarships, a bit difficult to go into it right now. European schools will be cheaper because the degree is shorter. So obviously you're going to spend a bit less money. Most of the scholarships will come from the school. This means you apply to London Business School, and if you get accepted, you also hope to get some kind of merit scholarship. Scholarships are based on a number of criteria, so it's actually very difficult to know in advance if someone will receive a scholarship or not. I can say that the GMAT is probably the #1 difference that you can make on your profile between now and, let's say, next year when you apply to the MBA in regards to scholarship. So the higher the GMAT, obviously the chances to get into a good MBA program, but with direct connection to the scholarship as well. So we discussed a bit how much it costs, but let's discuss also what you get in return. So these are some of the recruiters that came last year to London Business School, and there were over 300 recruiters, all with positions for London Business School MBA graduates. Some of the companies had more than one position, okay? McKinsey had 20, just an example. There's about 500 students a year at London Business School. What I'm trying to say is there's more work than students. Now, if you really want to work at EY, you might in the end find a job at Deloitte. I'm not saying that you're going to manage to work exactly at the firm you're targeting, but you have a good chance of finding a job because there's very high rates of employment. It's all over 90% in all the top business schools. You know, I always show this slide and I wait a few seconds and then I say to people, is there a firm here you wouldn't like to work at? And there's always someone in the front row smiling and saying, haha, Burger King, you know, what's Burger King doing here? So actually the position at Burger King was one of the most amazing positions. It was a management rotation program position. Every 6 months you do a different position at Burger King. And just to keep the haha, it wasn't flipping burgers and cutting tomatoes, okay? So 6 months you work in the real estate, then 6 months you work in strategy, then 6 months you work in marketing. And after 2 years, you actually talk to your managers and decide which department you want to work at. So that was an amazing position. They pay as well. If I just look at some MBA salary averages, you can see that and by the way, these are base salaries before other things like bonuses. You can see that the US salaries tend to be between $150,000 and $160,000 on average. I actually just spoke to last week to someone I worked with last year. He's a second-year Kellogg student, so he's not a graduate yet, he's a student. He did his summer internship at Google. He got offered a job, and I asked him very frankly, what's the salary? And I can just tell you that the salary here on the left is definitely average because his is much higher, plus a sign-up bonus, plus a relocation bonus to the Silicon Valley. So salaries are pretty high. If we look at European schools, salaries are very high as well. And if we add this to cost of living in Spain, or France, or England versus the US, plus the degree was shorter, you can actually see that usually Europe, the return on investment will be faster, and actually the salaries are quite similar. Okay, even if they're 10, 15% lower, they're quite similar in terms of what you end up with at the end. Someone asked me an interesting question. Can I go and study in Europe and then get recruited in the US? Okay, the answer is, in theory, yes. And if you go on LinkedIn and you go on INSEAD and check out their graduates and where they work, I think about 20% work in the US. But it doesn't say there how many of the INSEAD graduates were American to begin with, how many of them had jobs in the US before INSEAD. In a nutshell, if we just want to keep it kind of black and white, if you know you want to go and work in the US, go to a US school. If you know you want to work in Europe, go to a European school. I would even take that further and say go to a second-tier US school if you know you want to go and work in the US versus a tier 1 school in Europe. Okay, so that's just my view. Obviously, there's millions, well, not millions, but thousands of exceptions. But that's just my view. Just keep it simple. You want to live in the US, go and work in go and study in the US. So just one more slide about what schools are looking for, timeline and questions. Basically, they're looking for smart people. Okay, and in your application, you're going to have to prove to them that you're smart. This is both in the GMAT, both in university, and in your professional experience. They are looking for professional experience and something substantial, academic excellence. So they do want to see that you have an undergraduate degree, that you receive good scores there. The GPA doesn't have to be super duper high, but it does have to be good. And the GMAT has to be good. These are the best schools in the world. And David mentioned before this 700 mark, yeah, the GMATs have to be high. They do want to look for some leadership. So it either is leadership experience or some kind of leadership vision or leadership potential. Let's say you haven't led anyone at work, but in university you volunteered somewhere and you led their little team. That's another way of showing leadership experience. If you have international exposure, show that. A lot of people don't. But if you've worked with international teams, if you've been abroad, just show that. One last thing is this red pizza slice at the bottom, which is school interest. The schools want to know that you really, really, really want to study in that specific school, okay? So if you want to go to a specific, if you want to apply to Columbia, tell Columbia how much you want to apply to Columbia. Show that you've done some research on the school, show that you're really interested in Columbia. So I just put here a slide for deadlines. Some of you said they're still thinking of 2019, very ambitious. The US schools have 3 rounds. You've actually missed 2 rounds. So basically, some schools still have 2 or 3 days rounds. Actually, today there's some of the schools have round 2. But basically, you have round 3. It's going to be in April. Just to be clear, round 3 has lower chances than round 1 and round 2. Plus, if you're an international applicant, schools really don't like international applicants applying in the last round. Let me just explain why. If you apply in April, you will get an interview notification in May. You will be interviewed in June. The school will make their final decision in July. Now, university starts at the end of August. If you're an international applicant, the school is crazy taking a chance with you that you'll actually get your visa in time. And that's why the school doesn't really want to take a chance with an international applicant applying in April. I'm not saying you don't have a chance, but if you are applying that late, explain to the school why you're applying that late, and try and make the school understand that you don't have a problem to get out a visa with a short notice. Same goes with the European schools, but the European schools tend to have more rounds. It's not just 3 rounds, depends which school. And you can still apply in February, March, and even April, and it might not even be the last round of the school in Europe. Try not to apply at the last round of any school. That usually has less chances. Right, if you're a more sane candidate and actually going to apply in 2020 because you're working on your GMAT now, well, work on the GMAT. You still have time. Work on the GMAT in the next few months. My strong suggestion is try and finish with the GMAT around May. If you finish in the GMAT around May, you'll have June, July, August, 3 months to apply before round 1, September 2019. For all the schools, Europe or US, also Canada, dates are kind of similar. If from some kind of reason you're delaying that a bit, that's fine. Apply in January 2020 for September 2020 studies. Try not to miss that January deadline for 2020 studies. Again, if we're speaking now, January 19, I think that's enough to take the GMAT. Again, you will need for the application 2, 3, 4 months, but as long as you finish with the GMAT by May for round 1, or by September for round 2, you should be fine with the timing for the application. Last slide, what do you need for the application? Well, it's pretty long, so don't wait till the last minute. You will need a CV. Your MBA CV is very different than your job CV, so I'm not going to go through that, but it needs to be specifically done for the MBA. Each school will have 1 to actually 6 or 7 essays, so NCAD is probably the longest application with 6 to 7 essays. You'll need 2 recommendations for most schools. You'll need the GMAT, like we discussed, or GRE. If you don't come from an English-speaking country, or your university wasn't in English, you might need to take a TOEFL. So just check that out as well. And then there's some technicalities of the online application. So it takes a long time. Be prepared. So that was very, very short. That was the quickest I could do it. Now I'm just going to answer some general questions. So I'm staying on, and then I can answer some specific questions. But I'm actually going to ask some general questions, trying to answer some general questions. So someone's asking me about a 1-year MBA program for a career switcher. Is that okay to go and do the 1-year MBA? If you're a career switcher, I definitely see value in MBA programs that have an internship. All 2-year MBA programs have an internship, a summer internship between year 1 and year 2. A lot of the 1-year programs do not have an internship. Some do. So for example, NCAD January term has an internship at the end of the term. So it really depends. London Business School does have a summer internship. A lot of the other European programs do not. If you really want an internship, and there are advantages to it, try and go to one of the 2-year programs or the NCAD or London Business School program in Europe. Although I have to admit that even a regular 1-year MBA program you know, if it still has 90% success in finding jobs for the MBA students, you know, there's a full-time job straight away without an internship. So I wouldn't say that's the only criteria. Another question about the one-year MBA program was, if I have 7 years of experience, I'm a very experienced candidate, should I go for a 1-year or a 2-year MBA? And their answer is whatever you want. Okay, schools are absolutely fine with a 7-year applicant, 7 years of experience applicant. I would say that once you have more than 10 years of experience, that's getting a bit too much for the schools. I'm not saying you can't apply, but that would be worrying. If you have 7 or 8 years or 4 or 5, that's absolutely fine. Another question is regarding your GPA. Well, there isn't a right GPA score. Obviously, the higher the better. But I would say that the GPA is not the main factor to get into an MBA school. So no one's listening, I'll tell you what the factors are. The GPA usually is around 10% of your total application. Okay, so that's not the most important factor. Again, if you have some kind of merit, yeah, you get bonus points. If you have a terrible GPA, yes, that might be bad and might light some kind of a bad sign on your application. But the GMAT can be around 30 or even more percentage of your 100% candidacy to a certain school. So even if you have a low GPA, just get a great GMAT, and that will show that you have great academic ability. Someone's asking me about age, 31, 32, absolutely fine. I have a 37-year-old candidate who just got into work in Kellogg's, absolutely fine. Like I said, I would actually count the years of experience as a mark, and if someone has more than 10 or 11 years of experience, that's actually kind of a mark. Another question is, a more experienced candidate, if someone has more than 10 or 12 years of experience, what should they do? First of all, just Google our site, ARINGO, and then MBA over 30. You will find a whole page about that. There's actually 5 specific programs for people with more and more experience, and whoever asked me that, I will try and write on the private chat those specific programs. Or just write down my email in any case and just shoot me a line, and I will send you links to all those special programs. There's one in Stanford, one at MIT, one at London Business School, one in Foster, Seattle, and one at USC. So those are regarding the senior programs. I'm getting a question, what's the difference between an Indian MBA and a different MBA? Well, there's obviously a few very, very good schools in India. They're actually, for an Indian applicant, might be even harder to get into than Harvard or Stanford. Okay, they're very tough to get into. They're amazing schools. The salaries afterwards are quite high. The difference is they're amazing schools in India. They're not world-known, well, they are well-known, but they're not a world brand like a Harvard or an INSEAD. So yes, ISB is a great brand in India, but not necessarily in the US. How much time after the application do you get an answer? Well, it depends on the school. I actually had an applicant who applied to Carnegie Mellon 2 weeks ago, and he got 6 days after an interview request. So it really depends which school and when. But basically speaking, if we kind of just look on the high level, about a month after your application, you will get an indication for an interview. 2 or 3 weeks after that, you will have the interview, and about a month later, you'll get the final answer. That means if you apply in September, the final answers will be usually around the beginning of December. I'm going to answer a few more questions, okay? I'm just running, I'm doing it quick. Part-time programs. So the problem in brackets with part-time programs is that you don't get a student visa to that country, okay? So if someone's thinking about a part-time program in Chicago and they live in Germany somewhere, that might be a problem, right, to commute every 2 or 3 weeks. On the other hand, there are some specific part-time programs for commuters, usually called executive MBAs, EMBA. So if you're looking for a part-time program which is designed for commuters, just look for EMBA programs. Again, send me a line, I'll send you whatever I can think of is suitable for you. And I would say something about the part-time program. It's what you make out of it. So if you're going to do a part-time program at Columbia, you make out of it, even if the program's on Friday and Saturday, it's a platform. So if the program's on Friday and Saturday, on the weekend, on Saturday and Sunday, but Bill Gates comes to campus on Tuesday, you're obviously allowed to go to it. So it's what you make out of this amazing platform. You should go to the Bill Gates presentation on Tuesday. You should go to the McKinsey presentation on Wednesday. So the part-time program, it's more up to you to fulfill and to make out of it an entire, to get out of it all the things that you can get out of an MBA, and even to find a job afterwards. The full-time program is more around that. It's more around the clubs and the extracurriculum and finding the job at the end of the MBA. I'm getting some specific questions about chances. Obviously, a GMAT is just one factor. So if you tell me your GMAT, I have no idea what your chances are to study in school. I need to see your profile. Feel free to send me your CV and I can give you a little chances estimation. I've written down here my email. I hope you can see that. And I think those were the main questions I can think of, which are very general. Again, this is my email, shimriw@aringo.com. Feel free, I love answering questions. Feel free to ask me something. If you do send me an email, I would prefer if it would be with your CV and as much information as possible so I can give you a good answer. That was it for me. Good luck. And thanks, David, if you're still there.
Yes, of course, I'm still here. Thank you very much, Shimri, for being here with us today and teaching us all about MBA applications, the do's and the don'ts. I suppose I can also give a few minutes. Let's give it 3 more minutes for questions if there's any specific questions for me. This webinar will be recorded and should be emailed out to you as well. I do believe there are 2 special offers that we give for all of you here with us during bootcamp week. Offer number 1 is from ARINGO, where Shimri works, and I'm just going to leave it up on the screen here. It's a 1+1 European special, and our round 3 US school specials, especially for all of those of you who said that you still want to apply for 2019. So please keep this offer on the screen in mind and email Shimri with any questions you have. The second special offer is